Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to our live stream. Thanks for joining us today for our topic of the week. I'm here with the very knowledgeable Kelly and Ned Vandiver. They are relationship coaches. They are healers and catalysts for profound life change, and they're going to be joining me today to talk about our second losing strategy. Last week we talked with you guys about a losing strategy in relationships. That was, what was the one we talked about last week?
The need to be right.
The need to be right. And that one is, you guys can catch the replay in our feed anytime you want. But now we're tackling another one. And this is basically the second in a 5-part series.
Losing strategies.
Exactly. We're talking about losing strategies in relationships. This one is called controlling your partner. And we're actually going to do it in 2 parts. And I'll explain more in just a moment. But I just wanted to acknowledge that we're drawing from the work of Terry Real for this losing strategies part, or for this section that we're doing. He really identified the top most common losing strategies or coping mechanisms that couples will use that work against them. They're really tools that people use that don't work. They're actually, they give them the opposite outcome of what they're really looking for. And controlling your partner is such a big one that we see every day, not only in its obvious form, which we're going to talk about today, which is really sort of direct, overt attempts at controlling our partner, but also in the indirect, not so obvious, covert ways of controlling our partner, which we're going to talk about next week. But we're talking about this today really because whenever a couple is engaged in either one or multiple losing strategies, it's basically a guarantee that you won't get what you want in the relationship. And as common and as acceptable as these strategies are that we see all the time, and they're supported in our culture, these are really painful dynamics that end up damaging your marriage. And they're so damaging that they most often lead to divorce, or couples will stay together, but they'll end up in the same exact pattern like 20 years from now. They're still doing the same thing. Yeah. And we don't want that for you. You know, our mission really is to support you guys in breaking out of these old patterns and creating something healthy and authentic and really fulfilling.
Yeah.
So today we're going to tackle controlling your partner, and we're going to talk about this in 3 parts. We're going to talk about how this shows up, right? Exactly what does this look like? What controlling behavior is and what it's not, in case you're wondering, am I too controlling? And, full disclosure, I am a recovering overt controller and covert controller. I've done both. So there's no shame in admitting it. We're here to just be honest, right? We're going to talk about why it doesn't work, what happens as a result, like where this will lead if you keep doing it. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what you can do to stop doing it. So first, I'm just going to dive right in. Thank you guys for joining today. What do we mean when we talk about controlling behaviors? How does this show up? And we're really going to be focusing on behaviors today. And we'll share from our experience as coaches what we see the most. But I want to just touch on a thinking pattern that is kind of underlying the behaviors that we see, that you may be aware of or may not be aware of. But I just want to highlight this because if you can change your thinking underneath it and your beliefs underneath it, it makes it so much easier to stop. And really what it is we oftentimes are operating from this assumption that our partner holds the key to our own happiness. Like what they're doing or not doing is what everything is riding on. And so we ultimately are giving them more power. And then we want to control them because so much is riding on it, right? Ironically, we're giving them too much power. And then we try to get it back by controlling them in a way because we think that they have the key. So for example, how this shows up is, and I had this in my early marriage, everything would be great if only my husband would be doing these things. Or if only he would not be doing these things, everything would just be great, right?
Yeah.
I would be happy only if you would just pick up after yourself. If you would just pick up after yourself, everything would be fine. It's just all on him, right? What's another big one, you guys, along these lines? Maybe you listening can relate to this, right? Is if there's something that's cropping up, there's something that if I could just get them to change this one thing, everything would be fine.
If you would just do this, if you just would stop doing this, if you would just give me this, like if you really loved me, you do this for me, So
if you loved me, that's a huge one.
Well, for a lot of guys, probably
you say you love me, but you don't really love me. You don't really love me because you do this. So don't tell me you love me because it's not true.
Mm-hmm. That's a big indication.
Yeah, well, a lot of the guys are probably, what I hear a lot of is, if you wouldn't nag me so much, I might be able to get some things done, but you're pestering me all the time. You don't even give me a chance to get anything done.
That's a good one, Penny. That's a good one.
Yeah. Not all the time. Right.
Yeah.
And then if you here's what you need to do, right? Do this or don't do this. Be this or don't be this.
Yeah.
Whether it's trying to get him to do something or whether it's trying to get him to not do something, you're invested in that. And you really believe that if they're not doing it, it's evidence that, and maybe it could be if you really loved me, or it could be if we're meant to be together, if this relationship has a future.
Right.
I'm going to stay with you, then it has to be this way.
Right.
This is not to distinguish, like we all have boundaries, we all have bottom lines, and we all have deal breakers. We're not talking about that today. We're just talking about where we really kind of are stepping out of our lane and trying to control other people's behavior. We have to actually allow them, and we'll get into that in a minute, to be who they are. And if it turns out that they're not meeting our criteria, well, then we have a decision to make.
Right.
But we don't want to get what we want by controlling them. So when we talk about direct, overt controlling, what we're really talking about is, if this is for you, if you tend to be like the bossy one, if you're the one who tends to be really clearly in an obvious way that's not under the radar, you're directing things. Yeah. You're not hiding that you're doing that. You're really clear about it. So I think I was a pretty overt controller early in the marriage, where there was no hiding about it. It was like, this is what I want. And it wasn't just a request. It was like, if you don't do it, there will be consequences kind of attitude, right?
Yeah, I always say,
and it's different than a boundary.
Well, it's almost like you're the parent and the other person is a child. It's almost, you almost speak to that person in that voice, as opposed to having this mutual, thing where you both respect one another's points of view. And if you don't, you have a dialogue about it. It's just, no, you're going to do it this way, or this is just going to be the case,
Silly. Yeah. Like you're either mothering your spouse and acting like they're the child and they just get in line.
Right.
When they're like the bad kid and they need to, do what they're told. Or it could be very paternalistic and like condescending the other way around.
And the horrible part about that is, when you treat your spouse that way, and it even gets to the point where you feel like, okay, you have to chastise them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be anything physical, but it may be in the way that you speak to them about that specific situation that is very not in alignment with, that person actually being an adult, let alone your significant other. So it's very demeaning, and it really doesn't help the situation at all.
Yeah, and it sets up that dynamic when you create that sense that if they don't do what you want, there will be hell to pay. Whether talk about what that looks like, what is the hell to pay? Yeah. Because it's okay to ask for things and it's okay to make requests. Where it becomes controlling is these things that we're going to talk about. So number one, let's talk about emotional abuse is the really obvious one. Yeah. We'll talk about that one first.
Yeah.
How do you guys find that to be showing up as a form of control?
Well, for the emotional abuse, what I hear a lot of times, this is a huge, problem that I see a lot and hear a lot about, is really around sex. There are a lot of women who want to talk to their husbands about having more sex or having more connective sex. And, I hear, and the guys will get really, they will pick this one thing because they know it's very vulnerable. And it usually is around weight. For example, she'll bring it up and he may go, well, if you hit the gym a little bit more and you had the body that you had about 15 years ago, this wouldn't be a problem. Just really, and that's very, it's horrible. It's just a horrible thing to say to your wife. It's not supportive. And not only that, it's usually not the problem.
Right.
It's not even the true issue. It's just one of those things that, hey, I don't really want to talk about it, but and I don't really feel like there's a problem in that area. So this is the way I'm going to deal with it.
Yeah. And so the way, ladies, that your guy will use that is basically it's controlling, and he's using emotional abuse to control the conversation, okay, because he doesn't want to have it. Yeah. And so he's controlling you, he's controlling the conversation, because usually with women, we'll go and start thinking we're really ugly, we're really fat, there's something wrong with us, and it, can throw us into our own little shit storms in and of themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's very controlling, and it's very mean, and it's emotional abuse is what it is. So now you know.
Yeah, and the way that it's controlling is that it's basically saying, is teaching somebody, if you control them by the fear of hurting them. They don't want to get hurt, so they're going to again just back off and not ask for something, or
right, because they don't want you to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So fear of being emotionally hurt or attacked, or having the tables turned and below the belt. That's a great example. There's many examples of this.
And typically, a woman, when she's coming to her man and she wants to have these conversations, that's the way the female connects. That's the way the feminine connects to the masculine. We want to talk about it. We're natural communicators. We bring aliveness to everything. So we want to do that. And if a man doesn't know how to connect to his emotionality at all, he's going to do anything he can to shut that down, because he does not want you to bring it back up ever again, because he's not comfortable going deeper and really connecting on an emotional level and listening to what you're saying. It's just he can't even do it. He doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that's a good distinction to make, is it's emotionally abusive, but it's not for the sake of being abusive. It's for the sake of, it's not just to hurt you for the sake of
mechanism.
It's just a way, it's just a weapon that's being used as a way of refusing to enter into a conversation or control the conversation, or the direction that the conversation goes.
Yeah.
And another example of emotional abuse, and then I want to talk about other things too, but is to make demeaning comments in front of other people in public. If they don't do what you want, like if you're disappointed because your spouse isn't picking up after themselves, and then in front of company, you make a dig at them, or you ridicule them or make fun of them or something, you make them feel embarrassed in front of others, you call them out on something personal, you know what I mean? That's another example of emotional abuse. Or with just withdrawing your love and just like, but denying that you're doing it. And anytime you're like having your spouse second guess themselves and think they're crazy, just to get back at them, that's a form of emotional abuse as well.
Yes.
Which so it goes, as you can hear, way beyond just like overt name calling, which that's verbal abuse. But financial abuse is another form of control. We see that a lot.
That's pretty
control of the money.
Yeah, and that's pretty dominant among a lot of narcissistic men, or they have narcissistic tendencies. They have a tendency to choose that specific thing because they know the effect it can have on a person. In terms, when you're doling out money weekly to your spouse, and without good reason, and it's different if you have a conversation and you've chosen one of the two of you to have a specific place around that, in dealing with the money. But we're not talking about that. I'm talking about the person who tells you this is the budget. I'm going to control the money. I'm going to take the bank card from you. Okay. And I'll give you cash when, I feel like you need it, so it's horrible.
Complete control over the money.
Yeah.
Or another way that you'll see it show up is if they're not completely like, Mr. Commando or whatever you want to call it, over the money, and like the wife has a debit card or whatever. If the wife spends any amount of money on anything, they get like just completely just scraped over coals, blamed for all kinds of stuff, like, just ridiculousness.
Where it really gets into the minutia and petty justifications. Because the thing with money is, having access to money is obviously it's access to power of choice, of being able to purchase not just things, but what you eat, what kind of support you invest in, what you wear, how you present yourself to the world, what kinds of activities you do with your children. Yeah. It's much bigger than just money. It's really about what you value and what you permit and what kind of life you're actually creating for yourself.
Yeah.
If you don't have financial control, you don't have control over the life you're creating. That's just a fact in a capitalistic society, you know?
Right.
So if you don't have the financial intimacy, which is really where both people are talking about what it means to them and coming up with a shared understanding, and it works for both of you, where one person has all the reins, that is another way that you can control your partner.
Yeah.
So think about that. There's also a few other different ways. I want to mention them really just in bullet points, and then we'll go into each one. One more in detail. A couple of quick ones. Excessive talking and pretending to not understand. This is something that a lot of times overt controllers will do as a way of controlling the conversation or controlling the way things go. Excessive talking means you're not allowing any responses. You're making many points in a row when you're getting into a discussion with your spouse. You're not letting them get a word in edgewise. They're not able to process their own thoughts to respond to each thing that you're saying, because now you've got so many in a row.
Yep.
It might not be conscious. You might not be consciously doing it, but it's a way of maintaining control in the conversation, even subconsciously. So if your spouse is telling you you're talking too much or you're flooding them, even though your intention is to connect, you might actually be overtly controlling. That might be something that's playing a part in the way that you're connecting.
Because usually what's happening, if you are an excessive talker and when you are overtly controlling like that, usually what's happening is you're going down the list, right? Like of your brain, of your mind, of just like every single thing
of grievances
going on in your life that's just all messed up.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing is pretending to not understand is a common tactic. If your spouse pretends to not understand and you're like, I feel like I've been really clear, but they're acting like I haven't been, your spouse might be an overt controller, or the other way around, it might be you. So instead of just plainly disagreeing, they'll just be like, I just don't understand, or they'll refuse to own their own position. So you get kind of confused and you don't understand why you're not lining up, or they're not really taking a stand. So you can't get clarity on like, oh, you think this and I think this. But if you're pretending to not understand, it actually puts you in control. It's kind of like this way of making them have to explain themselves more.
Yeah.
So in that way, you're controlling the conversation. This is a tactic that some people also will do consciously or unconsciously.
Almost like, what are you talking about? I don't.
Right. And it's sort of a way of dismissing. It kind of, you could lump it under emotional abuse.
Yeah.
Right.
Or you could lump it under displaced responsibility, but displaced responsibility is this whole other thing that overt controllers will use, you guys, right? So what are some examples of what that looks like, right? That's basically when you take what's yours to own and put it onto your partner, and that shows up in a few different ways.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about that. We hit on it a little bit last week, I think, when we were talking about staying in your lane, you know, and drawing that distinction between, where your boundary is and where your partner's boundary is. And when you begin to step over into your partner's boundary and you begin to, pour your stuff or the part of your responsibility and putting it into their hands, that means you're displacing your own stuff.
Right.
And so a lot of times that, if we, and I want to talk, I have to bring up finances again, because a lot of times these are the fights and these are the arguments that generally take place between people who are having issues. You can have two people who know that they may have an issue around money.
Yeah.
handling money or managing money. And an example of somebody displacing that may be, I know, we've been talking about this and the taxes or what have you. I bought this tax software for you, specifically. Okay, so that you can go to program and you can handle this, because I think I got it down pretty good. I'm pretty good at this part of it, but I'm going to go ahead and let you handle this part of it because I think you need work in this area. And, and that's something that both of you really need to be working on together and really having a discussion about it,
Or it can just be, it can just be in the everyday, dynamic of, a couple, and every single couple has that one or two or three things, topics, or, situations in their lives that, they kind of go in circles about. And until you really learn how to work through those things, in a more seamless, communicative, healthy way, it shows up mostly in the everyday dynamic of being in those arguments, being in resentment with one another, not being happy, getting into fights, and just constantly just in this with one another. And you truly think that your partner is the reason for why you're feeling this way. And so you're putting it all on them. And then what you're doing essentially is not understanding that this inner work to be a happy fucking human being, it starts inside of you. Mm-hmm. It starts in you. You are responsible for all of your happiness. Yes. Period. End of story. And so, when you've got holes all throughout your self-worth, anything that your partner can give you is never going to be enough. You've got to heal yourself from the inside out. That's why, Monika, you call this the inside out work, right? It's like you have to take full ownership of where you're at, how you feel, what your life looks like, and heal yourself first. You can't heal your relationship until you heal yourself first. And also you can't really heal yourself fully without being in relationships. So it's like it's both, and you can do the work together alongside each other. But to me, displaced responsibility is it's your fault that I'm not happy, and it's your fault. And no, it's no, you got to own it. You got to heal yourself and figure out why are you in the place you're in now, period.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting too, because when we do that, we're actually giving up control over them, but we're taking control back for ourselves. It feels like giving up control to just let go of what they're doing and look inward, okay, well, I'm just looking at myself and I have to let go of them. That feels like letting go of control, but really we're getting our own power back for our own happiness.
Yeah.
So that's what it's all about. And we're going to touch on that in the solutions really quick. I want to just mention a couple specific ways that deflecting responsibility comes up. One is tit for tat.
Yeah.
If your partner brings up, then that's a classic defensive maneuver. Any defensive maneuver would be a deflection of responsibility, okay, or not owning your full power. Tit for tat, turning tables, and then one is called projective identification, which is really just this idea that you're going to create the feelings in your spouse that you yourself have so that you can point at it in them. If you're feeling insecure, you'll behave in ways to make them jealous so that they feel insecure. And then you can point at them and say, why are you so needy? When really you're the one feeling needy. That's another way of deflecting. And that's really hard to find in yourself. That gets pretty deep. We're not going to tackle all of that today, but I wanted to touch on that. And one last thing I want to bring up under overt control as a thing that comes up a lot, I find for women who are running the household that are taking on that role more, I did this a lot, which is toxic delegation. And that means you're asking your spouse to do something. Hey, I'm handing this off to you, but then it needs to be done exactly the way that you would do it. And you're going to criticize them if it's not done the way that you would have done it. They can't win, right? I mean, because if you really want them to take full responsibility, they might do it the way they want to do it. And it might not be the way that you want to do it. So are you willing to delegate? And that means let it go, right? So think about that. If that's you, I know that was me. And that is really all we had time for today, you guys, but I wanted to really leave that with you to think about.
Totally talk about this for like another hour, seriously.
There's so much more to talk about, but next time we're going to have more time, and we're going to wrap that up even more in detail. If you guys have questions, we're going to answer your questions about overt controlling tactics. If you have questions about your own relationship, also, we're going to get into covert, more codependent, under the radar attempts at control, because a lot of us that feel like we're being controlled might actually be actually attempting to control as well and not even know it.
Or you might be in a marriage where you're both fighters, right? And you're both controlling one another, right? Like, so there's all different dynamics. But I know we have to end it. If you guys want help breaking this down in your own relationship, in your own marriage, and you're ready to stop the toxic fighting and the back and forth and the bickering, and you really want to not only save your marriage, but make it like the healthiest and the happiest that it ever has been, book a call with us, because that's what we do. And we'll be happy to hop on a call with you and listen to the problems you're having and see if we can help you or not. Fix it.
Yeah. And if it's something we can help you with, we'll let you know. Really, it's really if you want help to find a way to get what you really want in the relationship without controlling, without having to drive a wedge through controlling behaviors in order to get what you want, by letting go, which is the irony of the inside out work. You end up getting what you want after letting go of the control of that. Feel free to book a call. Also ask any questions in the comments. And in the meantime, think about what your own triggers are. Ask yourself, what are the triggers for controlling behavior, right? What is it that happens before you feel the need to control the situation, so that you can be more mindful and observe that without reacting next time. Also, tune into your fears and desires. Really think about, like, next time you want to feel, you're feeling controlling, ask yourself, what do I fear right now? What do I need? And then the next step is to then work on asking for what you need, right? You have to be willing to ask for what you need and then relinquish control and be willing to risk that they might disappoint you. Maybe they won't, though, disappoint you at all. You won't find out what they're giving freely of their own volition, and it won't mean the same thing until you stop trying to control that and just allow things to unfold. So just ask yourself those questions in the meantime, and we'll dive into it a little bit more next week as well.
All righty.
Thank you, Kelly and Ned. Thanks,
thank you, Monika.
Thank you guys for tuning in.
Have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.